Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the All Things New podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope that y'all have been having a wonderful week so far, and I hope that it's nice and summery and that you've been having a nice time, a nice June. Thanks again for tuning in. I appreciate y'all so much. So today's topic is it's okay to desire marriage. That might sound a little bit weird, but I will explain where I'm coming from momentarily. So I feel like oftentimes the idea that if you're single and Christian that you shouldn't quote unquote want to be married because it's not your season yet. And I think that's so weird. This is a very misleading idea and it's not even biblical. And I think it's just very misleading to say, oh, if you're single, don't beg God to be married or you shouldn't want to be married because it's not your season. That's so weird. Who made that up? No, come on now. That's a toxic idea actually, and it's very misleading. As I think it just encourages people to not desire marriage, and I'm not saying that it has that effect on everyone. However, that idea is just not good. It's not a biblical idea. It's not a good idea, and let me explain why. Well, I'll just come with biblical ideas that are correct, but that idea that you shouldn't desire marriage is not necessarily a good idea. It's not a good thing to perpetuate. So Proverbs 18:22 says, "He who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord." So right off the bat, we see that having a wife from a man who finds a wife finds a good thing. That is good. It is good to have a wife if you are a man. And also, not only that, but he obtains favor from the Lord. So marriage is a good thing. It's a beautiful thing that God created. And it should be, if it's something you desire, that's not bad. Don't put yourself down because you desire marriage and you're single. That's okay. You should desire marriage because then that means that you will hopefully do something about it. You'll hopefully put yourself out there, start praying for your future spouse, um, preparing to be a spouse. So it's important to remember that it's okay. Marriage is created by God. And that's weird to say that it's bad to desire something that God created. Of course, not everyone marries, but if that's a desire that the Lord's put in your heart, believe that he put that there for a reason and that will come to pass if that's something that he put in you, you know? So yeah. And the next passage I like to read is Genesis chapter 2 verses 21 through 25, which say, "And the Lord caused a deep sleep to fall on Adam, and he slept. And he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh in its place. Then the rib which the Lord had taken from man, he made into a woman. And he brought her to the man, and Adam said, 'This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And they were both naked, the man and his wife, and were not ashamed.'" So this is something that God created and wanted, is marriage. And the picture of biblical godly marriage is a very beautiful thing. And so, once again, it's okay to desire something that the Lord has put in humans to desire. Um, Obviously, in order to continue, we have to procreate. And of course, marriage, that's one of the purposes of marriage. But as human beings, we have that desire to have children and to have a person, right? And to be coupled up. So it's okay to have that desire. It's biblical to desire marriage. It really is. The next passage I'd like to read is Hebrews chapter 13 verse 4, which says, "Marriage is honorable among all, and the bed undefiled. But fornicators and adulterers God will judge." So the Lord created the institution of marriage. He created it. He created this thing. Of course, it was not exactly the same as it is now. In the West, the Bible, the culture here is not Western at all. However, our Western values do come from the Bible, but this time in the world, not West at all. The West didn't exist. Anyways, or maybe it did because of the Roman Empire. The West as we know it, let me say that. The West as we know it did not exist back then. So obviously marriage is a little bit different. The way we do it is different. However, the principle is the same. Man and wife come together, create a family, etc. So marriage is honorable. It's an honorable thing that the Lord created, and the marriage bed is undefiled. But it says, fornicators and adulterers God will judge. Fornication and adultery are sinful, and they are not honoring to God. However, marriage, a godly marriage, is honoring to the Lord. Marriage itself is honoring to the Lord. Having children, having sex within marriage honors the Lord. So keep that in mind as well. Proverbs chapter 19, verse 14 says, houses and riches are an inheritance from the fathers, but a prudent wife is from the Lord. So again, we see the fact that a wife is a blessing. A wife is a good thing, literally from the Lord. So if you're desiring marriage, you're desiring something that is godly. You're desiring something that's from the Lord. And marriage is something that makes you holy. It's not, the purpose of marriage is not to be happy, it's to be holy. But happiness, hopefully, should and will come from that. But the purpose of marriage is not to be happy, not to make sure that you're the happiest person. It's for holiness, it's for refinement. But happiness will come from that as well. So the next passage I'd like to read is slightly lengthy. It comes from Ephesians 5, which is not surprising because it talks a lot about marriage, as do several other chapters. For example, I think Colossians 3 and 1 Peter 3. But I'm going to focus on Ephesians 5 right now. And it says from verses 22 through 23, wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, and also Christ is the head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. Therefore, just as the church is subject to Christ, so let the wives be to their own husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her, that he might sanctify and cleanse her with the washing of water by the word, that he might present her to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be holy and without blemish. So husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as the Lord does the church. For we are members of his body, of his flesh and bones. For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. Nevertheless, let each one of you in particular so love his own wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. It's good stuff here. It's talking about marriage, but the idea of marriage is that it's an example, it's a physical, a tangible personification of Christ's relationship with his bride, the church, with his people. So the husband is as Christ and the wife is as the church. And so the husband is the head of the wife and the wife is the bride. And as the husband, being like Christ, he loves his wife and cherishes her. And you see as well this idea of purity and of cleanliness, of being holy, not having spot or wrinkle, as it says, that she should be holy without blemish. And then it says, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies, for he who loves his wife loves himself. We see this selflessness here, and we see this refinement and this theme of holiness within marriage. Marriage is something that is purifying. It's something that causes you and forces you to examine yourself. If you want to have, of course, a healthy, godly marriage, I'm talking about the ideal here. And God's design is this is God's design, but it's that the husband and wife become holy as they are seeking the Lord and as they are in this relationship, this marriage that is a picture of Christ's relationship with the church. Because as the husband is to embody what Christ is, who he's like. The wife is to embody what the church is like. Because this is the picture that God is painting for us. Well, technically Paul's painting it, but it's the picture that God has painted that Paul is writing about. So marriage is a beautiful thing that God created, and it is literally an example that we can see of Christ's relationship with his bride. And in that specific thing, in the fact that marriage is a holy thing created by God, we are becoming purified as you are in a marriage relationship. If you are seeking the Lord, if you're taking his wisdom and going along the path that he's laid out for you, of course you're going to make mistakes. But if we're going towards God, um, holiness will be a result, because that's what happens when you're in a godly marriage. That as you pursue the Lord, you get closer to him, but you also become holier. And so marriage makes you holy. Marriage doesn't make you happy, it makes you holy. Well, it will make you happy. That's not the purpose though. The purpose of marriage is to be holy. The last passage I'd like to read is Psalms chapter 37, verses 4 through 5, which say, "Delight yourself also in the Lord, and he shall give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord, trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass." This is one of my favorite scriptures. I feel like I quote it in every episode because it's applicable to like everything, all of the above. But it says to delight yourself in the Lord, and he shall give you the desires of your heart. So delight, then desire. Delight yourself in the Lord, he shall give you the desires of your heart. Then it says commit yourself to the Lord. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust in him, and he shall bring it to pass. There's this cause and effect we see here in these two verses. So we must trust God's plan. We must trust his plan for our lives. We must trust the way he does things. We must trust the doors he opens and the doors he closes. We must trust in his sovereignty. We must trust and know that what he does is for a reason, that he does things intentionally and he's not doing things for fun, right? His will is so good and so great for you, and it's the best for you. So if you delight yourself in the Lord, he will give you your heart's desires. And if marriage is something that he's put in your heart to desire and pray for and want, then that's a great thing, and you should pray for that. And I think that the idea of not wanting to desire marriage is something that tries to discourage us from idolizing marriage. However, I think that idolizing marriage is definitely possible if that's all you're praying about, all you're thinking about. But if you think about wanting to be married daily, that's not a bad thing, right? Because we can then pray about it. We can then think about how can I be a better spouse to my future spouse. Not for the purpose of being a good spouse, right? Being a good wife or husband. But, these things, the fruit of the Spirit, are things that we should be exemplifying in our lives that will trickle into a marriage that will make us better wives and husbands as we are more like Christ. So as you are in the place of wanting to desire marriage and you're single or you're dating and you haven't gotten married yet, trust the Lord. He knows exactly what he's doing. He's so sovereign, so powerful, and he's so faithful. And if he's put that desire in your heart, trust and believe that it will come to pass. But you have to remember that it's important to be equipped as well. Like as you're waiting in this journey, in a previous episode I talked about waiting, like the Lord's equipping us to receive the thing we're waiting for. You're not going to be completely ready. Of course, you're never going to be completely ready, but like there's things that we should equip ourselves with to receive something so that we can cherish it and take care of it and be good stewards of that thing that we are receiving. And so as you're in a journey, as we are desiring marriage, desiring something, not just marriage, but something that you want that you haven't received yet, lean in on God. Just trust in him and say, Lord, I know I'm waiting for this thing. I believe that it will come to pass, but I ask you that you would show me what you'd like for me to learn in this season. Teach me things that I should know. Show me how to be more like you. Show me how to be more selfless, more loving. And in that journey, as we grow closer to the Lord, we will, it's not that we won't desire things anymore that we desired previously. It's that the Lord will become a bigger priority in our lives. And, by trusting in God, by focusing on him, we won't idolize things anyways, because if we're trusting in him, we won't have idols because he's everything, right? So that's another way to prevent idolization, or to steer away from idolization, is of things, right? And sometimes we can idolize good things, right? But we shouldn't idolize them because there is no other God besides the Lord, right? But if we want to avoid idolization of things, we must keep our eyes fixed on the Lord. Keep our eyes on him, trust in him, lean in on him. Know that what he has for you is so good, that his plans for you are so great, and that as you trust in him, he will equip you. You grow closer to him. You'll have a flourishing relationship with him, your community as well. You will that those things that you receive from the Lord will trickle out into your community, into your friends and family, and you'll be so much more fulfilled. So, bottom line is, it's okay to desire marriage. It's not a bad thing if you want to be married. I know that sounds like weird, like the title, like it's okay to desire marriage, but I feel like it's demonized sometimes in Christianity. Like, oh, don't desire it because then God's gonna give it to you, and it's like that's silly. That makes zero sense. There's zero biblical support for that idea. It's just kind of silly how that's perpetuated quite often, and I think that's dissipated quite a bit over recent years. However, I still think it's a true thing where it's like, oh, don't desire that thing. Forget about it. Because then God's going to be like, oh, look, they don't want it anymore. Let me give it to them. That's silly. I think that's kind of ridiculous. I think it does come from the idea of like trusting the Lord and like your desires becoming His. But at the same time, it's like God gives you innate desires as well. Like God gives you desires. And it's good to pray and want those things because they're given by God. So I don't know. I think that's kind of a silly idea. And I think it can be harmful as well. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about it briefly and give some biblical evidence for why it is okay to desire marriage, because marriage is something that God created for us. So yeah, that's all I've got for y'all today. It's a short little one, but I wanted to talk about it for a little bit. Anyways, thanks so much for tuning in for another episode. Don't forget to give a rating or review if you haven't. I know I hound you guys, but it's important. It's so important. And also give a follow if you haven't done already, and share. That would be super awesome, and I would appreciate it so much. I hope that y'all have a fantastic week, and I will talk to y'all next Tuesday. Ciao.